urban planner Daniel Burnham once said, "Make no small plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood and probably themselves will not be realized." Well, it was with that sentiment in mind that the participants on this panel undertook the challenge about 18 months ago to create a big plan. One that did have the magic, we thought, to stir men's and women's blood, and one that could get built. As we stand here today on the cusp of launching this project into construction, our goal today is to take a step back and reflect on how we got here and to spend a little bit of time and understand what lessons it may offer as Providence moves forward, which is the theme, of course, of this symposium. Our format is simple. I'll review the project and make a few comments about the key components of the project and some thoughts about why or how public-private partnerships can succeed. And then each of our distinguished panelists will comment on their role in the process. So before I go into my slides, let me introduce them quickly. I think most everybody in the room knows who they are, but quickly I'll introduce. We've got the Honorable Richard Licht, who was a key part of this process when he was Director of Administration and Finance in the Chafee administration. Next to him, Dr. David Dooley, President of the University of Rhode Island. To his left, Russell Carey, Executive Vice President of Policy and Planning for Brown University. To his left, Don Gralnek, Executive Director of the Providence Redevelopment Authority and a key component of the city's efforts in this process. And to his left, Ms. Lisa Teal, who is Vice President of Finance and Administration for Rhode Island College. So we've got a spectacular panel here, and what I'm going to do is go through the project, as I said, in a few slides, and then we'll get their perspectives and have plenty of time for discussion going forward. So let me see if I can work this correctly. So the project, I thought it would be worthwhile to just run some numbers by the crowd just to reorient you to what we're talking about, and then we'll go through some images and pictures. If you look at the components, South Street Landing, the large building, historic rehabilitation, administrative offices for Brown of 135,000 square feet, the Nursing Education Center, the venture between URI and Rhode Island College, about similar size, 132,000 square feet. What we call River House Graduate Housing, 135,000 square feet, 266 beds, and a 650-car parking garage. Well, as I said earlier, that is a big plan. That's 600,000 square feet of new or renovated space, $215 million approximately in capital investment in the entire project, 1,500 construction jobs during the course of this overall project, 540 permanent jobs, and benefits to the city, just specifically in fees and property taxes, gets us up close to $10 million. So it is a significant project just in terms of its scope and scale, I think by any measure. I'm going to jump ahead. I think you all know where it is relative to its location within the Jewelry District on the Providence River, right across from the Alpert Medical School, and right as part of Davall Square here. And here's the site plan. So to orient you, again, you have the Point Street Bridge here. You've got what will be the new 195 Park here, and Davall Square here. So as you can see, the project itself encompasses quite a swath of the Providence River, and part of what makes it such a catalytic and wonderful project in and of itself is what we hope it will do to the Providence riverfront and its views, et cetera. As you can see here, I've included parcel 42 in the new park that's going to be built, because part of our project is to create a continuous walkway, public walkway, along our project, along the National Grid land, connecting into the new park, and obviously connecting over to the bridge. And then, of course, parcel 42, which it is no secret, we are very interested in developing. I know Jan is here, into a hotel. And the reason why I incorporate all this is you can see it feels like as of one overall project. So there's our garage, South Street Landing building itself, River House here. Okay. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about National Grid and its role in a minute. So I'm going to share with you a few images. This is looking from the Point Street Bridge back to, through the housing towards the big building itself. And you can see here this wonderful opportunity to continue this public walkway along the river. Oops, let me see. There's a view of what will be the renovated South Street Landing building and its main entry off of Eddy Street. The Liner building, or as I think some people call it now, the Squirrel building, will be, that's going to be coming down as part of this overall project. I love this view because it gives you a sense of the great public spaces we're going to be creating right along Eddy Street next to the garage here. And again, as I said earlier, from a site planning point of view, it is meant to feel like one as a whole, but it creates this wonderful opportunity to engage the public in a great space. This looks down. These are, again, the residential buildings, and with a great connection right off of Point Street. This is right here, South Street. And this is the existing Davall Square buildings. So again, you can see a big emphasis on creating public spaces. I know that's a theme that you've probably heard often. It is so important not only to create these spaces, but it just creates value in the long run. This is a view looking down Eddy Street. Alpert Medical School's here. You can see the main entrance to the South Street Landing here. And looking back, obviously one of our challenges is, building garages is a necessity. And I know a lot of the panelists' discussions earlier have been about trying to reduce car traffic and the like, and we're certainly all for that. But in the end, right now, you still have to create parking. So our goal is to create a highly designed parking garage that fits. We'll have some activated retail along Eddy Street here. Okay, so those are the images of the project, and we can come back to that if you want. I want to make a few comments about what I call the key components to a public-private partnership. And this project is the very definition, I think, of that. First, I think it's fair to say the number one thing you need to come in is capital, private capital that wants to invest in a particular project, in a particular city, in a particular state. And we've had the benefit of doing a lot of projects, big projects in Boston and other locations. And if you have committed private capital, that's always a good place to start. And then you need to match that with some level of public subsidies. And that public subsidy can take many forms. As many in this room know, we are the beneficiaries of what I would call, we're locked up state historic tax credits under the old program, and we're unlocking them. We're the beneficiaries of federal historic credits under the normal program, and through Don Gralnek's help and the leadership of Mayor Tavares and Jim Bennett, we were able to negotiate a favorable tax stabilization agreement. But in order to get these large projects done, you do need some elements of public subsidy, and I'll come back to that in a second, which translates into committed leadership. And by committed leadership, again, as an investor, it is so important to know that at a political level, the mayor, the governor, the key legislative leaders are committed, and not only committed, will stay the course through that commitment. It is clear, without the leadership of Mayor Tavares, without the leadership of Jim Bennett, Don, Governor Chafee, Richard, of course, this could not have happened. And the consistent committed leadership is a big part of a successful public-private partnership. And in particular, the mayor was so consistent throughout. When we first sat down with him, he was the one that helped bring National Grid to the table and create a very strong partnership with them. He was the one who stayed committed on following through in the tax stabilization agreement. So my hat's off to the mayor and his committed leadership around that. Anchor tenants. You have to know that there has to be a revenue stream to pay back, to pay back the capital, to know that there's value creation. Obviously, as a developer, when you know you've got two institutional anchor tenants, like the state of Rhode Island through URI and RIC and Brown University, that's a great place to start any project. But I'll tell you, whether it's a hotel user, schools, a corporate tenant, you really need to focus on that as part of the mix. Sometimes that's the hardest thing, but if you have the top three, it becomes a little easier to attract that anchor tenant. And the last is what I call full stakeholder support. And by that I mean, in a project of this size, there's many, many constituents. Obviously, we've talked about the political constituents involved. You have neighbors and neighborhoods. You have the city council, you have National Grid. You have, obviously, the Preservation Society. You have the National Park Service. The approach has to be all shoulders, so to speak, behind the project. And when all shoulders are behind the project and you have that full stakeholder support, when the inevitable problems come up, and they do almost every day, every week, there's a commitment to solve the problems and move forward rather than have those problems come up and be a stumbling block to not get there. And there's many people in this group here that have been part of that. Bill Hatfield, Dan Bowman's here, all across the board. And it's almost like running a political campaign in a way, because you really need everybody on board. So when you have these 5 things together, you can get stuff done, and you can get big stuff done. And as I said, in terms of redefining public-private partnerships, it can work, and we can all do it together. So with that, what I'd like to do is start with Russell, because again, for me, our kind of entry into this project started with Brown in a discussion around graduate housing, and then it kind of took off from there. But Russell, you can share that.
Great, thank you, Dick. So I'm delighted to be here. I'd like to thank the Society for inviting me, and for all of you for being here to speak a little bit about Brown's role in what is just an exciting and I think transformational project. As some of you in the room know, and some of you were retained to work on, Brown signed a lease on Wednesday afternoon for our portion of the South Street Power Station, about 136,000 square feet with Commonwealth Ventures. And that was a very important milestone for us, one we're proud to have behind us, more than a little relieved. I would not have the courage to be sitting next to Dr. Dooley if that lease had not been signed. So thank you for all the support to make that happen. I don't think I can emphasize enough how important this project is to Brown. I mean, we love this building, and President Paxton will be speaking on a panel this afternoon. She loves this building, and it's not just its iconic location on the river, the available square footage, its historic design, and how important it has been to all of us, but I think also really the history and the importance it's had to the city, both in the past and going forward. For almost a century, this building was the lifeblood of the city, and it enabled Providence and Brown to grow and prosper. And over the last 20 years, as it sat dormant, it has become, in particular over the last decade, as Brown has invested $200 million, we now have about 1,000 people whose primary location to teach and conduct research and work is in the Jewelry District. It's become an increasing concern for us. It has made the neighborhood, from our perspective, feel empty, even has caused concerns from our community members about safety, and has just really not been what we aspire to be collectively in terms of the Jewelry District and the city going forward. So that became a key strategic concern for us, but one that we didn't necessarily have the capacity to solve on our own. Our role in the project actually began in 2011, when we issued an RFP for a developer to build graduate and medical student housing, which is also a key strategic need for us. Dick was selected, and his development company was selected to work on that project. We began with a residential complex that would go essentially where it is located today, but as a standalone project on the Davos Square parking lot. And roughly a year later, in July of 2012, he came to us and said, will we be interested in a broader development that would include the South Street Power Station, knowing that if he was going to invest and we were going to help spur that investment, tens of millions of dollars next to this empty hulk of a building, that was not an attractive investment. I can say that like everyone that we have ever talked to about this project in the last 3 years, our first reaction was, that's crazy. But we listened, and I think worked very hard together over the next 6 months to try and develop an idea that really could become something viable and something that could move forward. At the same time, we had new leadership in President Christina Paxson. We were writing a new strategic plan, really thinking about the investments we'd already made in the Dooley District and what we had to do going forward to support our academic needs. And a key principle that she developed was that our core academic programs really needed to continue to stay on College Hill, particularly for undergraduate activities. And that's why we made the decision to build a new engineering building next to our existing engineering building. But that the Dooley District was also incredibly important for us for programs like the medical school, which we'd already located there, research activities, graduate medical student housing, and administrative activities, which could free up space on College Hill for other priorities. So we identified, and really what made this project very important to us academically, was that we could move a number of administrative offices that were spread across College Hill into this building, freeing up space that we could renovate and use for academic priorities, but then also adding people to the Dooley District, which was a missing link for us in terms of critical mass, driving economic development, making the area feel safer, and for us feeling like there was more of a campus there than we had at that time. We also knew very quickly in that planning process that this building was much too large for us, for what our needs were and our capacity were to fill it. And so knowing that University of Rhode Island College were looking for space in that area for a nursing education center, we went to President Dooley, we went to President Carey, and we said, we have a great deal for you. They also thought we were crazy. They had looked at this site several years before. It was 11th on their list of 11 possibilities. And so we really had to work together, and both presidents, all three presidents led this effort, I think, very intensely, to imagine what was possible rather than what was not possible. And really to think about how the space could be used creatively and collaboratively and solve our needs and also be something that we could financially complete. For Brown, we did have other options, probably options that were frankly cheaper than going forward in this direction, but the opportunity to build out the Dooley District in a more robust way and also help spur economic development for the city and the state was a high priority for us and something that was very attractive to our president and to our corporation. I want to emphasize, though, that this is not a partnership of convenience by any stretch. It is an academic collaboration. We have deep and long-standing collaborations with URI and RIC around many academic activities. We have invested heavily in the Dooley District, over $40 million, to make that the center of our medical education activity. Partnerships with Johnson & Wales, a new physician assistance program, partnerships with Bryant University with a PA program as well. And so the idea of being able to locate a nursing education center directly across the street from our brand new medical education building was highly attractive, and I think will actually yield benefits that none of us even realize yet when it actually happens. But that was a key reason that moving forward very aggressively with this initiative was very important to us. I also would like to just quickly, and it's very related to that same point, but would like to underscore the importance, both from our perspective institutionally, but also as citizens of this community, of the importance of nursing education. I think I've had a great deal of personal experience, for better or worse, with our hospital systems. My middle daughter was a brain tumor survivor. I recently had a serious illness myself. I have met dozens and dozens of URI and RIC educated nurses, and they are absolutely excellent. But they deserve this facility and to be better, and both for the current nurses in our community, the nurses to come, and the families that they care for. And so above all, frankly, personally, I think that's one of the pieces I'm most proud of, is that this idea, which President Dooley and President Carey have brought over many, many years, from an idea on a piece of paper to something that's on the cusp of reality, with the support of Governor Chafee, Judge Licht, Mayor Taveras, the General Assembly leadership, and many, many others, is just very exciting. It's something that we should all, frankly, be indebted to them for making happen. As Dick mentioned, this project is clearly a near-term economic driver, and I won't repeat the numbers that he cited, although they were, I think, very effective in making arguments to the General Assembly why this project should be supported, also to our corporation. Carey Bennett, who's in the front row, guided us through many of those discussions and many late nights on the State House, making those arguments. But beyond the economic development, the idea of preserving this building for the future, for the next century and beyond, building out a neighborhood that we can all be proud of, that's vibrant, that's vital, that has economic output that we don't currently see, and raises all three educational institutions together is something I think that I know Brown is very proud to have played a small role in. It was a very exciting project to be a part of, and I'm very proud to be here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Russell. Before I turn it over to Dr. Dooley, I can just say, having sat in the room in several meetings with President Paxson, President Dooley, President Carey, and hear the excitement in their voices talking about the collaborations, talking about the potential beyond just even the nursing school itself, but creating groundbreaking treatment strategies, et cetera, was really awesome for someone like me to sit there and hear them brainstorm that. And I know that's part of the potential of this project. And then one other point I'll make, and I'll have Dr. Dooley comment, is the other potential around this is, I know there's been many stories written about delegations traveling to Houston or Pittsburgh to see state-of-the-art medical centers in Baltimore. Well, trust me, people will be coming to Providence to see this facility and how it interacts, because it is going to be a world-class, state-of-the-art facility. With that, Dr. Dooley, why don't you continue on?
Thank you, Dick, and thank you and the organizers for inviting us to share our ideas with you. Russ was quite right when he said that when he appeared in my office that day and showed me a concept that we would do together at South Street Station, I very nearly asked him to leave. Because I thought, this is going to be a waste of all of our time. Because Brown and Russ appeared in 2011, but Rhode Island College and the University of Rhode Island have been working on the idea of building a joint facility together in Providence since 2009. And one of the things I would add to your list of essential elements of a public-private partnership, Dick, is that it does require, particularly if you're going to do anything at all innovative, and you've already heard expressions of it from both Dick and from Russ, it requires all parties to think a little differently. For Rhode Island College and the University of Rhode Island, it was the realization early on that both of us needed new nursing facilities, and that it probably was too big an ask of the state to come together and say, we want a new facility at the Rhode Island College campus, and we want a new facility down in Kingston at the URI campus. That in fact, there were synergies to be developed and partnerships and collaborations that could be stimulated if we went together and built a single facility and shared it. And it would make the most sense by far to locate that facility in Providence. In fact, we thought all along that we wanted to build such a facility close to the Brown Medical School and close to the hospital complexes that are in Providence. That would be a very, very appealing location, in part because of what all of us had learned or knew previously about the function and structure of major academic medical centers in many urban environments. This was very appealing. But it was very difficult to get launched, I have to tell you, because it was way out of the box thinking for both our campuses. I mean, faculty are trained skeptics. They don't like any idea that isn't their own. So when you present an idea to faculty that's not their own idea, that's intimately tied to their futures, there's some skepticism that needs to be overcome as to whether that idea will really work for them. But we worked through that. The General Assembly funded a feasibility study. We ran through that feasibility study. We examined a whole lot of options that went all the way down to sites. We discussed how much our programs would grow, how much they could expand, how many more nurses we could train, what the ideas for partnership would be, not just with us, but with other entities in the health environment here in Rhode Island. And that was a very well done, I think, blueprint for moving forward. But it identified a number of options and priced them out in a rough way, and it was clear that the option of a public-private partnership could be very appealing economically, particularly if we went together and were able to do a good deal on the land acquisition. And that's the climate that we had when Russ and Brown appeared. So we'd done a lot of work. Our faculties had gone much more accustomed to working together through the feasibility study. They had gained some confidence in one another. The two institutions had a chance to refine their ideas and move the project forward, but it was very clear it was going to be difficult to initiate with just our own efforts. And that's why Brown coming on the scene and Dick coming on the scene and proposing, I think, an even larger public-private partnership endeavor than we had in mind at the time was so appealing once we had a chance to get past our initial cynicism and skepticism about the site that was being discussed, because it was workable. And I think if you've seen from the images that Dick has shared with you today, it's not only workable, it turns out to be by far the most desirable option of all of the options that we could have considered back in 2010, 2011, when we were in the midst of assessing the feasibility of the various options for doing this project. So I think being willing to think a little differently is essential to put these kinds of big multi-partner collaborations together, and everybody at the table who's been involved, from National Grid to the city to the state. I think even Dick's had to deal with some wrinkles in this project that are a little different than what he's had to deal with before. Certainly the institutions involved have had to think a little differently than we have previously. I can say that's true of URI and Rick, and I've heard Russ say that's true of Brown as well. That's an important element. And I think the foundation of that was critical in this is we developed a great deal of trust in one another. And that enabled all of us to be willing to tackle problems and to think differently than we would have otherwise. And there were some interesting moments along the way where that trust was really essential. Most notably when I was driving across the state of Iowa with my wife and our 2 dogs on I think a well-deserved vacation. And Carey Bennett called me and said, "You've got to get on a plane and come back because we have to deal with a very, very important set of votes in the General Assembly in the House and Senate, and we don't think we can get to where we need to be if you're not here." So I flew back. And there were many moments like that probably strained all of our patience and made us all do the kinds of things that we questioned our sanity to do. But at the end of the day, it's because of the trust we had for one another, because of, I think, the strength of the relationships that developed and the confidence that we had in the vision as well as in our ability to implement it, particularly with Richard and the city leading the state effort and the cities coming on board and really working together with National Grid and all of us to move this forward. I think that's what brought us to where we are today.
Great, thank you very much. There's no doubt, I mean, we didn't even mention so many of the other obstacles we had to overcome relative to even getting to the starting gate. You know, you've heard of hairy projects. This is the abominable snowman of hairy projects, that's for sure. Richard Licht, I cannot overstate how important his role was in leading the state's effort in negotiating with us, the legislative effort, representing the interests of URI and Rick in the process. And I know he's moved on to greener pastures, but we're thrilled he's here here today to share some of his experiences through the process and make some comments about that.
Thank you very much, Dick. Thank the Society for hosting this panel. This is a very, very exciting project, and to have played some part in it is something that I really enjoyed and grateful for. But I, too, had the same reaction when Carey Bennett called me up and said, "Can the president and I come talk to you?" And they came and told me about this project. I was familiar with the Dynamo House project and how challenging that was. I knew a little bit about the building. And I thought they really had moved to Colorado, where it was legal to smoke what they had to have been smoking to come and make this presentation. I said, you know, this would be tough enough, and I didn't really know Dick at that time. I said, this is going to be tough enough for him, but this is not what government gets involved in. But the governor and I met with Russell and President Paxson, and they brought up the same idea, and we were pretty skeptical then. But then we started to do our homework. Everybody did the homework, and we realized how important this is to the state of Rhode Island in the larger sense. I'm not talking about state government. This is the gateway to the 195 project. The state and the city are very concerned about seeing that developed, and we couldn't have this eyesore. Brown had the same situation. So that in and of itself, it was necessary to address this problem. But more importantly, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be the intangibles that I think both Russell and Dr. Dooley talked about that will pay off for the state. The relationships with the hospitals, the relationships just with the collaboration educationally, having just everybody working together will be great, will have great dividends. But the challenges that we faced once we got convinced that it really was a good idea, and there weren't many of us convinced about that, were to deal with the fact that General Assembly really, one, wasn't excited even about the Joint Nursing Education Center. It had been before them 2 or 3 times in different forms. And secondly, they didn't see this, but we persevered. The president did come back. We all worked, and we got a resolution passed. Actually, we got 2 resolutions because the House and Senate couldn't even agree on what the resolution should say. But the resolution was to charge the Department of Administration to report back within a year with a proposal on this, and we put our nose to the grindstone. And the most important thing that happened is the word that President Dooley used a few minutes ago, and that's trust. We had 5 partners. We had Rhode Island College, we had the University of Rhode Island, we had Brown, we had the state of Rhode Island, the state government sort of represented. We handled the budget in the Department of Administration, so we were there, but we had the governor's interest and the General Assembly's interest, and then we had Dick as the developer. And there was an inordinate amount of trust, and if there hadn't been that trust that we all said we saw had the same vision in mind. Now, there are tensions and there are issues, and there should be amongst and between all the partners, but it was that trust that made it work. And we very proud that the team, we also had good teamwork. Every Monday morning we had a telephone call where we talked about, at least on the state side with the two educational institutions, on what we had to get accomplished that week to move this forward. We met very frequently with Brown, both in person and on the phone, and we talked a lot to Dick, and there were good professionals on all sides, and we got it done. But the second thing is, why would this, when we're talking about public-private partnerships, why should the state even think about that? Because as Director of Administration, I had more people come tell us about public-private partnerships that were nothing like this. They were like, whether it was building a road or doing some kind of building. And I said, you know, we know how to build buildings. The University of Rhode Island and Rhode Island College build buildings all the time. We actually have access, we have very good credit rating, and we have access to credit. But here, this was such an unusual project. What we're not good at is taking risks. Government should not take risks. And I looked at this project and said, this is not what the state government should be doing. This is what private developers do. It's a challenge. There are so many things that you have to deal with. We needed to pass off that risk to the developer, and that is what was done. And Dick's a big boy, and he did this with his eyes wide open, and it's a very fair agreement. But the state has and I say that collectively with the educational institutions, other than in the neighborhood of $1 million of soft costs, we don't have any obligation on this until we get the keys. That's when we pay the rent. And all the burden, now we're working together and there are a lot of challenges, but all the burden is on this fine gentleman here, and he has to deliver. And that was crucial in the climate we were in. I hate to utter the word 38 studios, but we were in a post-38 studios environment, and if we were going to go to the General Assembly and say we were going to do this ourselves, I think we would have been laughed out of the place. But because we could say there was no risk. And the other thing, I represented developers. I've done a lot of projects. Played a major role in the airport, in the Providence Place Mall. There are 2 types of developers. There are those who understand that getting a difficult and large project done requires political skills, and I mean that in the broader sense, the ability to work with people, the ability to compromise, the ability to accommodate the stakeholders. And then there's the other kind that believe that that you get a steamroller and you just try and steamroll the opposition. I won't name names, but I represented both kinds in my day. It was such a pleasure to deal with the former in Dick. He knew and understood that if this was going to get done, he couldn't be a steamroller. He had to help us convince, and he had to address our concerns. And that is why we all trusted one another. And if we hadn't had that trust, it never would have gotten done.
Thank you, Richard. I will add to that by saying one of the key things that all the partners were respectful of is, and that's why I put private capital on that first piece, is, you know, in the end, we're here to make a return on the investment that goes into it. And as we went through all our negotiations, there was always that notion that they respected the fact that we and our partners still needed to make a return, that it needed to be successful in that regard. Because trust me, if the public part wins and the private part fails, then the whole thing falls apart. So all the stakeholders here were certainly respectful of that and that part of the process. You know, for me, one of the really fun parts of this whole process has been getting better visibility and getting to know Rhode Island College, President Carey, its leadership, Lisa, and seeing the two schools, their deans, in sessions working together in planning how this was going to work, both in terms of collaborative efforts as well as singular setups to educate their students. And it was really both educational and thrilling to watch that come together. And as I think you've heard earlier, it'll raise the stature of both schools. And so I'd like to ask Lisa to make a few comments about Rhode Island College's role here and carry that conversation further.
Okay. So thank you for having me today. I wanted to talk a little bit about not only our role, but also the tools I think that were necessary to make this a successful project. So I think one of the things that struck me when working on this project is how many partners are involved. Being a state school, certainly we have the legislature that we're working with, as well as the governor's office, which would be the Department of Administration. It was crucial to have Richard Licht as, I would even say, a champion of the project. When we would get on the phone and have phone calls, it was always, okay, what do we need to do to get to the next step? And was able to navigate between the governor's office, the legislature, and work with the colleges and the university to move this project forward. But again, just thinking about the number of partners that we have, URI is also a partner in this, as well as Brown and the developer. But then there's another level of partnership. The Nursing Education Center, is a joint effort of both Rhode Island College and URI. So they're actually two separate programs in the same building. So we are sharing our space. We are sharing sim labs, classroom space, meeting space, but we do have two deans who have two separate programs. So this is a little bit more complicated than the average public-private partnership. And when I say it's a little bit more complicated, we are having to talk with both deans to make sure that their needs are being met for their individual programs within the same space in the building. So we have one sim lab. So we're working now on, very closely with URI, on trying to figure out the scheduling of classes. We are still going to be discussing parking. I mean, that's probably we'll probably come to blows on that one. That's going to be a tough one because we all know what parking means to us, but URI and Rhode Island College in some aspect is considered one entity, but then we go to the next level and then right now we're doing 50-50 or something along those lines, but we're having to negotiate pretty much everything. At the same time, when we get to the next step, which may be IT, Brown says, you know, we have IT on that side of the river, so why don't we have some discussions and maybe we can work together on some of the IT challenges that you're going to face. So this really is a partnership on so many levels that I wasn't involved at the beginning of the project, but certainly trust was very important. But I think there are some other tools to make this project successful. I would say the first one was the shared vision. I think that everyone up here, as well as the city, had an idea, and everyone had different interests, but then when we put it all together, we did have a shared vision that we could all see an end state, and so that was very helpful. Richard touched on this a little bit, and I think primarily because I think he was instrumental in negotiating some of the specifics of the lease. But I think what was really important was a proper and in-depth analysis of the risk. Oftentimes you get into these projects and the reason that they fail or they're not what you want it to be at the end is because there wasn't a real understanding of the risk that everybody was going to take. And I think that from the start, everyone understood that the risk, a certain portion of the risk, the vast majority of the risk was pushed to the developer. But there were other risks that, you know, it's closed, dates of opening of the milestone dates, opening of the school year. There's a lot of things there's other risks that are involved. And so it started off with, I think, a very, very thorough analysis of what those risks were, who was assuming the responsibility, and what we could do as a college and the university, and certainly Brown, to mitigate those risks. I think another thing that I have learned from this project is learn to know when you need help and ask for it. It's been a great resource. Rhode Island College is smaller than URI, so we don't have the resources, and every time I say I need help, they have been able to, we've been able to craft an idea, but in addition, so that for them to move this, our issue forward and to help us out. But in addition to that, sometimes state projects get bad names because they're not adequately funded to begin with, and that was part of this project. There was an understanding that we are going to need help. We are going to need consultants to pave our way through not just the start of the project, but throughout the project. And so that funding has been made available to Rhode Island College and to URI, and that is absolutely imperative because there's several issues here that are things that we have not worked with before, and so the best way to move forward is to be able to call on the consultants as we need, and we have been able to do that up until now. So I think that has been paramount in the success up until now. And certainly, I call it the constant conversation. We have meetings and phone calls all the time. We have a regular phone call every week, a couple actually, and it is a constant conversation. So there are times where maybe somebody's not on the same page, but usually by the following week, we're all, at least we know what the other person is talking about. Sometimes when you're on a project that has a long duration, people kind of drop in and out. Sometimes they're more active, less active, and I have found that the level of interest has been consistent. So it is a constant conversation, so you're always talking, you have this consistency. You're talking to the same people, and sometimes people have to pass off the particular issue to someone else, but we're all able to keep each other in the loop and up to speed. And again, if we do have an issue, we're able to come together and collaborate so that we can come up with a solution and a path forward.
Lisa, thank you so much. And you touched on a common theme, I think, that was throughout and will be, and that is for all of us, and certainly for the project, is we're kind of going into uncharted waters in many respects. And lots of times the natural reaction would be, haven't done it before, can't go there, go on to the next thing. Whereas the spirit of this collaboration was, that looks hard, but let's try and figure it out and let's all lean on each other to try to do that. And I think Lisa's comments are right on relative to that spirit of trying to, move beyond the normal reactive response of haven't done it before, forget it, to, you know what, there might be a solution here, let's figure that out. And I really appreciate those comments. There's one group that's not here up here on the panel, but is a very important partner in all this. You've heard it referred to several times, and that's National Grid. You could see from the site plan I showed you a big swath of land owned by National Grid. I mentioned the liner building. Part of this, one of the complexities associated with this project is National Grid doing a major infrastructure project at the same time, kind of surrounded by everything that we're doing. And unless we had an effective partnership with them and a great line of communication with them, I think it's clear to everybody sitting here that there would be no project. And that has happened and is ongoing as we work through issues. And none of that would have happened without the leadership of Mayor Tavares, Jim Bennett, and Don Gralnek here at the city. Mayor Tavares in particular helped forge the commitment from National Grid to participate in a big way, and the leadership of National Grid has been terrific to work with. And then the other piece, is, of course, with the city was it was very important to the state and legislative leadership that the city also be a participant in a significant way relative to the economics, I'll call it, of the project. And in a controversial, or I should say, there are two things that are always controversial. One was 38 Studios, as Richard referred to, and the other was tax stabilization agreements. Both are kind of dirty words, so to speak. But Don and his leadership and his team helped us create what I thought was a very fair tax stabilization agreement, fair not only to the participants and all of us, but really to the city in terms of beneficial. So Don, I'd like to turn it over to you now and make a few comments about the city's role.
Thank you, Dick, and thanks to the Preservation Society for hosting this event. Let me not repeat much of what's been said. First, I think that the city team was very ably led by the mayor. It involved Mr. Quinn, the city tax assessor, Mr. Mancini, the city finance director, Mr. Bennett, who is the economic development director. We spent lots of time trying to figure out what the proper response by the city was to this proposal, and I think that we came up with compromises along the way that both protected the city and made the project move forward. It was clear from the beginning that this project was, in all respects, very beneficial to the city on a number of different levels. The question was one of time frame. Could we get done what we needed to get done within the time frame that Dick's time schedule established? And so we had to work backwards because the city has very public processes that need to be followed. And this was, in this age and day, a very transparent process. So we went through a number of public processes, went through a number of steps with the city council. We kept them informed along the way. The mayor's office was instrumental in helping us achieve consensus where we needed to internally. Secondly, and Dick is much too nice a man, but I do need to give credit to Matt Marcello and his team at Hinckley Allen, Dick's lawyers. They were very good, have been very good, hopefully will continue to be very good to work with as the final steps get established. I think that the overarching point here from the city standpoint, before we get into the technical aspects, is that a partnership is more than just a combination of folks coming together over economic interests. It is a shared set of interests. There were no prima donnas in this process, which was very important to it being successful. The word trust has been used repeatedly by the panel members, and that takes a lot of different forms, but it essentially means that you can have a conversation and speak your mind, say what's bothering you, what you need to do without regard to playing got you or without regard to people keeping a scorecard in terms of pluses and minuses. I think from the beginning, Dick established very clearly what the objectives were, what the benefits were, and that he was a person in charge of this process. Dick is a very fair, to our knowledge and to date, a very fair person. He is very mindful of the role of private capital and the need for a return, but that he was also mindful and respectful of the public process. And as the judge indicated, there are two types of developers, and Dick is essentially the spokesperson for the developer, who understands his context and understands that in this environment, a steamroller approach would not have succeeded. In fact, had he had that approach, my guess is that the project never would have gotten as far as needing city help. So it is essential that for these kinds of projects, indeed for any kind of project, that you need the ability to communicate and to establish that you're sincere and that you're good to your word. There were very few instances, if any, here where people retraded positions. Those of you familiar with the real estate business know how that works, that you gave me X last week, but now I need Y, so we're going to retrade that process. That is not going to happen in any kind of time frame that this project needed. So on a technical level, the city needed to do three things. We needed to have a redevelopment plan in place for the area to backstop Dick if the project needed any assistance from the redevelopment agency. We can only operate in redevelopment plan areas, so we established a redevelopment plan to assist and underscore the project. Secondly, we needed a tax stabilization agreement, as Dick indicated. Dick's team worked together with the Economic Development Director, myself, and Dave Quinn. I can't underscore the importance of having a tax assessor who is both professional and highly knowledgeable and also a very good human being, and Dave is all three of those. We were able to, with Dick's team, put together a series of charts and a series of numbers that both met the city's objectives and met Dick's objectives. The third thing that the city did, and this was maybe somewhat out of the box, was that we played a role of advocate inside the city system. The city needs to be organized, in this case it was, to have a point person who is knowledgeable about the project, is knowledgeable about the public process, can state the benefits, can state the risks in a way that the various folks on the city side can ask questions of and have a level of trust in that they're getting accurate information. The redevelopment agency, I hope, played a role in that effort. In the course of the numbers of city hearings, we did not obtain any negative votes. We had one abstention at the city council from an employee of Rick who abstained, but other than that, it was a unanimous vote all the way along. And I think that in itself, those of you who are familiar with Providence politics, that speaks volumes. So that's all I have.
No, Don, thank you very much. I really want to give a lot of credit to the City Council and its leadership. You know, so much is written about the processes, but they were thoughtful, they were smart, they asked good questions, they analyzed it carefully, they fully understood the benefits and the risks, as Lisa talked about earlier. So, you know, all throughout this process, I think everybody was willing, rather than dismiss it, willing to really dive in and understand what was going on and how it worked. And as Don mentioned, you know, we had many stakeholders working on this. You mentioned Matt Marcello and his team, the architects, the designers, all the folks working with the deans on the space planning. So we've had an army, I'll call it, of support staff and consultants working to bring us to this point. And the other theme, of course, you've heard consistently is, you know, these projects are about people. And in the end, it's people that need to work together, trust each other, and move forward to solve problems that help bring these things together, and that's been clearly, the key component of this entire process. So I think at this point, maybe I pose a couple of questions to the panel to encourage some discussion, and of course we'll have time for some questions before we break for lunch. One of the things that struck me during this process, is particularly in the legislative process, was how important communication was, both internally, but managing messages so that nobody was out in front of each other. And in a highly charged environment, sometimes, the wrong message at the wrong time can really be painful, if not right. Can you, Russell, maybe you can comment, or Richard, why don't you comment first?
I'm definitely going to defer to
If I have
the
any
judge.
expertise at all, it's about the legislative process, and consequently I have no expertise, because it's every time it's unique. However, right now I deal only with lawyers, and Matt Marcello is my classmate in law school, but if we're going to mention lawyers, it takes two sets of lawyers to make things happen, and Sean Coffey and his team represented the state, and Sean and Matt both deserve a tremendous amount of credit, because my father, who was not a lawyer, said there's only two kinds of lawyers, good ones and bad ones. And I said, that's interesting, Dad. Would you explain that? He said, a good one makes the deal happen, and a bad one kills the deal. And Matt Marcello and Sean Coffey and their team are both not just good lawyers, they're both excellent lawyers. So I have to protect my own job, even though I have a lifetime appointment. I had to get that out there. The political process was essential to keep the General Assembly informed, and at the same time make sure they weren't meddling in the details. And again, that was keeping them constantly briefed. And I think Carey Bennett, who's here, was constantly reminding us that we needed to have meetings. We did have both public meetings with them and private meetings with them to make sure that they knew every step of the way where we were, without necessarily asking them to get into the middle of the details. Because if we did that, we would have never gotten it done, because there would have been many, many different views. So we had to present them a final package that we thought they could accept. And you have to understand, the General Assembly had three functions. One, there's a state law that says that if any lease for more than $500,000 or more than 5 years, 500,000 total rent, or 5 years, needs General Assembly approval. Secondly, in order for to borrow any money, a state agency, and for that it covers the two educational institutions, need General Assembly approval. And for both the tenant improvements and all this equipment, it's going to be need to borrow some money. And thirdly, the state is paying not all the rent, but a substantial portion of the rent, and that's a major budgetary item. This is in the neighborhood of $5 million a year, which is not an insubstantial number. So we needed the General Assembly's approval for all three of those items. And I think it was just keeping them aware of where we were going, and progress reports without involving them in the specific details was what was essential.
Yeah, no doubt.
I just add to that briefly, I think you can't underestimate the importance of the staff level. And we've mentioned Carey several times, but there are people on Dick's team, Rick's team, at Brown, Marissa Quinn and Al Dahlberg, Allie Rogers in the judges, and when he was the director in his office, all working together, all coordinating. When one would receive immediate inquiry, they would all speak to each other to make sure they were saying the same thing, or knowing what the actual facts were before they were answering. And I think keeping a very clear line of communication, so there wasn't just necessarily a trust level at higher levels, but also throughout literally dozens of people who are playing critical roles, any one of which could have sent this in the wrong direction at any time. And I think we've seen many, many things end that way because of miscommunication or lack of coordination. But what drove all of them, I think, was a very clear vision set by the three presidents And then when it became a broader project, both the mayor and the governor, and everyone knew what the objectives were. And I think that was critical. This happens to us all the time at Brown. I won't speak for other organizations, but we have one idea on Monday and another one on Wednesday and a third one on Friday, and we go back and forth and iterate, and it takes a while to really get a sense of what we're trying to do, and that obviously makes anything much more difficult to accomplish. I mean, you add all the different participants we've made reference to, and doing it particularly in a public-private partnership in a public, transparent, with all the rules that the state has to operate under, and an intensely interested local media environment, I think the opportunities for disaster are high. And I think, frankly, there are many times where I've looked back over the preceding 6 months or now over the last 3 years, and I'm quite amazed we're here. And I think it's just really is both the leadership and the very hard work of people at all levels of all the organizations that were involved.
Dave, any more comments on that before we?
I think the most essential element of the communication all along, and I think what in the end was the primary reason we were successful, is that everybody involved, including then, as we brought them in, the governor's office and the General Assembly, bought into the vision and believed that it was compelling, that this was an opportunity for Rhode Island to step up and to demonstrate in a way that would turn heads up and down the East Coast, that it could do a major complex project that would create a signature, I think, complex, sort of expanding an academic medical center with all of the positive benefits that would bring to the city and the state, that it could do that in a way and produce the kind of outcomes in terms of the nature of the facilities, the quality of the space, the type of interactions that would exist there, that would really catch everyone's attention and serve as a linchpin to redeveloping an important part of the city in the Jewelry District and in the 195 properties. And it was that vision, which frankly Dick enabled by coming forward and meeting early with Brown, and then bringing that concept that included things we didn't think about, like housing and retail and so forth, into the picture. It was that vision, I think, ultimately that prevailed, and it was consistently communicated. I think everybody at the end, well, actually early on in the process, bought into that vision, could see the outcome, could anticipate the benefits, and stayed focused on that. And it was such a compelling vision, and I truly believe it will be absolutely transformational for the city and the state. Such a compelling vision that it enabled us, by virtue of being committed to that outcome, to work through almost everything else that came, well, everything else, frankly, that came along.